Let's go pick up some Cleveland Browns. Welcome, everybody, to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. It is Week 9, waiver wire time. I am Adam Azer with Dave Richard and Jamie Eisenberg. What is up, guys? And Jamie, you've got 80 leagues, roughly, something like that, 30, whatever it is. How many? Well, I ask you every week because I know you had some undefeated. Still got some undefeated teams left?
Just 2, but they're guillotine leagues, so I don't know if that counts.
It doesn't count.
Why wouldn't it count?
Because he's not playing against anyone. He's just not
just surviving.
Just
surviving.
Okay, so like there's no record. Explain the guillotine league because there might be some people.
Yeah, so I'm not losing because I'm still advancing every week, but I'm not beating the field. I think I've only beaten the field once so far in the season.
Yeah, in the one guillotine league that I'm in, I beat the field this week. Super proud of my team. Good job, guys.
Why aren't I in a guillotine league?
You're probably eliminated from a guillotine league if you were in one.
I was eliminated from a best ball guillotine league that I did, but that's like whatever, best ball. But if there was one league that you guys want to do next year that you're not in, I kind of want to do one of these vampire leagues where you get to steal a player when you beat them.
But that's only for isn't that only for one manager in the league? That's not for every manager, is it?
One person starts out with sitting out the first four or 5 rounds of the draft, right? 6 rounds of the draft.
I think they sit out the entire draft.
Well, the one that we heard that I'm sure you're going off of, Adam, right, is the one where you sit out the first 6 rounds of the draft.
It was 10 rounds or something like that.
Everybody had to get a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and a tight end, and then you were allowed to start picking 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah, and 2 DSPs. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's only fun if you're the vampire. Because if you're just like a normal team in that league, you're just trying to avoid losing to the vampire.
Yeah, it's kind of true. All right, anyway, let's get on with the show. We got a waiver wire to talk about. We got Monday Night Football to talk about. The Steelers with a 26-18 win. Najee Harris with 3 straight 100-yard games going into their bye. And George Pickens, it was kind of a disappointing fantasy game. Like Pickens caught 2 touchdowns that were overturned. Neighbors was disappointing. There weren't that many touchdowns in this game. There were a lot of field goals. But Jamie, what are your Monday Night Football takeaways?
It's good to see Najee Harris continuing to have this strong stretch of games, 3 straight games over 100 yards rushing. Russell Wilson has certainly turned this offense around. It would have been nice for George Pickens fantasy managers to get at least one of the touchdowns that he should have had. 2 right feet should equal a touchdown. I don't know if he would have hopped all the way to the end zone. They would have said no. That doesn't count if you're on the same foot. But in any event, look, Malik Neighbors had a little bit of a disappointing performance from his overall game, but 13 targets, 7 catches, 71 yards. And it's unfortunate Tyrone Tracy has the concussion because this is now 3 games in his last 4, at least 17 carries. In all 3 of those, he scored 14 or more PPR points. So it's been a nice stretch for Tracy, and probably not going to have him in Week 9 against the Commanders because of the concussion.
And on the topic of Neighbors and Pickens, if you have those guys in your league, expect to get some low ball trade offers for them because some people are going to say, oh, they just had bad games. I'm going to go and try and trade for them on the cheap. It's not how that works. Do not trade away Pickens nor Neighbors unless you are getting round 1 value for either one. Maybe not round 1, top 12 wide receiver value for either one of those guys. And so you'll probably get some terrible BS offer. You'll say no. Stay on course with those wide receivers. That's the advice. They're studs.
All right, well, listen, Daniel Jones hasn't thrown a touchdown in 3 straight games. Malik Neighbors has struggled now 2 straight games without Andrew Thomas. You see it right there in front of you. The pass protection is horrible. So I don't know that I don't want to take a low ball offer, but no. If I get second round value for Malik Neighbors, I might take it. I'm lower on him, I think, than you guys
Would you trade Malik Neighbors for Nico Collins right now if you don't need Nico for this week?
I would do that. I'd rather have Nico than Neighbors. Would you trade him for Deebo Samuel and Tank Bigsby?
No.
Right.
Yes, I would.
You would.
You wouldn't rather have Deebo Samuel than Malik Neighbors at this point?
I don't know what Samuel's health is, and McCaffrey coming back, I think, lowers the ceiling a little bit for Deebo.
All right. Well, I think I'd take Brian Thomas over him. Assuming Brian Thomas doesn't miss more
we
than,
don't know. The early report on Thomas was that he could miss up to a month. Now it looks like he'll play, but who knows? Question marks all over the place. Welcome to Week 9.
All right, let's do some buy lows and sell highs. And Jamie, you mentioned Nico Collins, so that's your favorite buy low right now.
I think anytime you look at a situation where a star player is hurt and that manager, it's got to be probably case specific in a few of these situations, but if that manager has been struggling without Collins and needs to get a win, this is your opportunity to come in and say, okay, I'll give you something for Collins. I can wait it out because my team's in a good spot, a few games over 500, or at least you're comfortable with your roster. So these are the type of moves you should be looking to make. Mike Evans, similar type situation. If you feel like you're going to be a championship caliber fantasy team or make a strong playoff run, you're looking at these top tier players in some great situations that could be difference makers down the stretch. You should try to trade for those guys. But Nico Collins clearly has to come back soon to justify making some sort of trade.
And if I've got Nico Collins, I recognize that, and I don't want to just give him away, but I also know that if I've got Nico, and same thing with Mike Evans, and I need some wins, if I get a good offer for those guys just to get some starters in weeks 9 and 10, I'm going to do it.
Okay, Dave, how about your favorite sell high? Buy low, Davante Adams.
Yeah, I don't believe that he's going to keep averaging around 7.5 PPR points per game like he has in his first 2 games with the Jets. The schedule, rest of season isn't that bad. The connection with Aaron Rodgers is right around the corner. He's still getting some good high-value targets. Garrett Wilson looks great. There's no doubt about it, but I think eventually we will see Davante Adams go back to being what the expectation was for him, which is good volume, good production, plenty of touchdowns. The Jets, I don't know if their season can be saved by it, but I think their offense will be turned around. I would try and buy low on Davante Adams.
I'll go right back to you, Dave, for your favorite sell high. It's the guy I just mentioned is having 3 straight 100-yard games, Najee Harris.
We had an interesting moment on our podcast today. You can watch it on YouTube where I asked, can you name 24 running backs that are better than Najee Harris rest of season? And Adam, you tried and you came close. And it makes me wonder that even though he's going into the bye week, he's been really strong. If there's a fantasy manager in your league that's having a hard time with their running backs, they might be willing to acquire Najee Harris for a little bit more than he's worth. But I think we can all agree he's no better than a low-end number 2 fantasy running back the rest of the way.
Okay, and Jamie, who's your favorite sell high this week?
DeVonta Smith. I mean, we know the story. Anytime there's been somebody missing, he tends to see his numbers pop, and he's coming off a disappointing game in Week 7, much better game in Week 8. And I don't know when Dallas Goedert is going to return, dealing with this hamstring injury. But when he does DeVonta Smith continue to play at a high level, or does he kind of just go back to low-end number 2 caliber production? So I think this is the type of player that you sell high on because his name still carries some value. The numbers have been good at times this year. But again, A.J. Brown missed time. Goddard's not missing time. I think when everybody's healthy, Smith will still be good. He just won't be great. So try and flip him now before Goddard does return.
I'm going to throw in one more. I want to get your take on this. And when obviously we say this all the time, right? We say sell high, it's got to be super high. Would you trade a running back, a total stud running back, arguably the best running back in fantasy, if his championship game and his semifinal game, the last 2 games of his fantasy playoffs, were at Kansas City and home against Baltimore? That is Joe Mixon's fantasy schedule in the playoffs. Miami, Kansas City, and Baltimore, and he has a bye in Week 14. So would you consider trading him? You could get probably almost anything you want for Joe Mixon, who keeps scoring more than 22 PPR fantasy points, or should we just keep him on our team and ride it out?
It's a compelling argument to trade him, and we know that he's one of the older running backs in the league, and that offensive line is starting to struggle in Houston, although he is overcoming it. I would be a little bit nervous that Houston does something to try and help Mixon shoulder the load at the end of the year if they are indeed going to become more of a run-first team, because that's how they've been winning their games, at least the last couple of weeks. Sure, if you can trade him into a stud wide receiver, by all means, go for it.
It's never a bad idea to explore those trade options, and it's the same thing like when talking about Tyreek Hill with his end-of-season schedule also. So if you're going to try and flip these star players, you must make sure you're getting probably 2 pieces in return. So I don't know if you're going to get, let's say, Joe Mixon for Justin Jefferson or somebody of that nature, but if you're trying to flip Mixon for 2 parts, I think that's something that can help, wide receiver and a running back and a quarterback, something like that can make your team a little bit stronger across the board. But again, you're looking 4 or 5 weeks ahead. Injuries could be a problem for those defenses. I mean, imagine the Chiefs if they lose Chris Jones, for example, for a couple of games. That run defense does not look as good, and you would be pissed off knowing that you got rid of Joe Mixon and he goes through the Kansas City defense because it's not the same.
All right. Well, I'm not going to trade him for Cedric Tillman, but I am going to try to pick up Cedric Tillman. Jamie, who are the top three wide receiver? No, top three in any position. Top three waiver wire priorities for you this week.
Yeah, Cedric Tillman should be the guy that you go after the most. 2 strong games without Amari Cooper and a very good game with Jameis Winston in his first start. And then it comes down to what you need. But I think the 2 quarterbacks, just in terms of a bigger picture, make the most sense. Matthew Stafford getting his guys back in Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, and he comes off a 32-point game last week. Has a pretty decent matchup this week against Seattle, so has top 10 upside. And then Bo Nix, 3 of his last 4 games, he's been very successful, coming off his best game of the season last week against the Panthers, and he gets the Ravens this week, which I don't think a lot of people would say that's a great matchup for him, but it is a great matchup for him, especially if that secondary remains as banged up as it is. So Stafford, Nix at the quarterback spot, but certainly Cedric Tillman's the number 1 overall player to go get.
I agree with you on Tillman. I was going to say about the Ravens, not only is the secondary banged up, but that D-line might be banged up too. If Michael Pierce doesn't play, it makes the matchup easier for the offensive line protecting Bo Nix. I like Tillman number 1. How about a little bit of love for Elijah Moore? 6 catches in each of his last 2 games. Probably more of a PPR guy, probably more of a number 3 receiver or a stash type, but he's the slot receiver in Cleveland, and we've seen now Jameis Winston doesn't mind throwing all over the place, and Tillman's going to get a lot, but I think Elijah Moore will get some too. And I still think Hunter Henry is in the mix as being a priority, especially if you're one of these fantasy managers that's still somehow struggling with tight end, and you want somebody, again, probably more PPR than non-PPR, who can get you 5+ catches week in and week out.
Well, when we come back on Fantasy Football Today, we'll talk more about quarterbacks and running backs on the waiver wire. And you could have some really difficult decisions at quarterback. You see Matthew Stafford out there. Do you drop a guy like Caleb Williams or Dak Prescott or something like that? We'll discuss when we come back on FFT. We are back breaking down the waiver wire, quarterbacks and running backs right now on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. All right, so we've got 2 teams on a bye, Pittsburgh and San Francisco, and we've got Jordan Love, who's going to be questionable this week. We've got maybe quarterback changes in Indianapolis and Carolina. We will see. Before we get into the waiver wire, this does actually play into it a little bit, Dave. If the Colts go with Joe Flacco, how does that change this position and the wide receiver position in terms of priorities?
I'm still going to have Matthew Stafford and probably Bo Nix ahead of Joe Flacco. I would put Flacco ahead of Jameis Winston. And if it's a shallow league and Stafford and Nix, for whatever reason, if they're already rostered, then I would pick up Flacco first and hope that either he starts, or if Richardson starts, then I can go and get Jameis Winston off the waiver wire. And yeah, wide receiver, if you can get somebody like Josh Downs, who's still available in about a third of CBS Sports leagues, I would take him over any of the Browns wideouts that we would talk about as well.
All right, so let's take a look at the list that Jamie has put together for quarterbacks to add. Matthew Stafford's number 1. And, I think the question for me, to you, Jamie, is who are you dropping at the quarterback position for Stafford? Because I've already done most of my leagues, and this is a guy that I want to pick up. He averaged 25 fantasy points per game in the last 6 games of last season. He's finally got a healthy receiving core. They look really good. So I had some tough decisions. Dak Prescott, do I drop him for Matthew Stafford? Do I drop Caleb Williams for Matthew Stafford? I want to know, how do you feel about him rest of season? Would you drop Kirk Cousins for Matthew Stafford? Where are you on him and all those guys?
I think Cousins is a good comp because, you've seen some highs and you've seen some lows, from Cousins. Most of the highs have come against Tampa Bay. So can he do it in a good matchup this week against Dallas, for example? So I would probably try and roster both those guys if I can. Same thing with Dak because we know what he's capable of. And last week was a little frustrating with the turnovers. But I think when you're looking at it, like Geno Smith without DK Metcalf at 100% or maybe missing is a guy you can drop even though he's leading the NFL in passing yards. I think you drop Brock Purdy and Russell Wilson on their bye week just to see if Stafford can carry you through the next couple of weeks. I think Caleb Williams, if unfortunately you're not sold on him and you don't want to carry 2 quarterbacks, you can drop him. And then clearly, even if he's starting, you could drop Anthony Richardson for Matthew Stafford. So there's several guys out there that you could say, okay, I'm going to go with Stafford rest of the way and just hope that what we saw last week is a sign of things to come. You go back to last year, 5 of his last 6 games, 22 or more fantasy points. Now, he did have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua healthy for a bigger stretch than just those 5 games, but things clicked for him over that stretch. So hopefully this is what we're going to see rest of the way, is that Cooper Kupp stays healthy, Puka Nacua stays healthy, get a little bit of DeMarcus Robinson like we saw, 2 touchdowns last week. There's a lot to like about what this offense is, and the one drawback would be is Kyren Williams stealing rushing touchdowns. That'll be okay every now and then, but I think Matthew Stafford's got a huge ceiling moving forward.
And who do you guys like better just this week, Matthew Stafford or Bo Nix against Baltimore?
I'll take Stafford. I listen, I think Bo Nix has been playing great. We've seen him. I think it's like 22 or 24 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. He's been great. And it's the rushing production that's helped him out quite a bit. But Stafford has more upside. And you heard Jamie say it at the end of when he was talking about Stafford. Just that's what you need to look for at quarterback now, because I feel like there's like 20 good quarterbacks that fantasy managers could start right now. And there's 4 or 5 that are just head and shoulders above the rest, and you know their names. And then everyone else is kind of muddled together. So any of those quarterbacks that have the upside for a 30-point type of fantasy game and 6-point per passing touchdown leagues, you've got to gravitate toward them. And I think Stafford is one of those guys.
All right, other options, Jameis Winston, Joe Flacco, Derek Carr, Trevor Lawrence. Jamie, talk to me about Jameis Winston. We're sitting here pumping up Cedric Tillman and Elijah Moore. Should we be pumping up Jameis Winston, 15% rostered?
He's got a tough matchup this week against the Chargers, then a bye in week 10, but it's Jameis Winston, and we know that he's got the ability to have a 303 and a 303-3 type of day, so you just have to understand there'll probably be some bad when the matchups are a little bit tougher. Really, if you're looking, though, you could just try to target him from a down the road type situation. Week 11, he gets the Saints. That's a revenge game of sorts. Would be a favorable matchup. The Saints defense continues to look like it's looked the last several weeks. And so when we get into the bye weeks, week 10, week 11, week 12, it starts to get a little bit more tough to find someone who you could trust. So if Jameis comes off the game against the Chargers with a strong number, then goes into his bye week, you'll trust him a lot more going into that week 11 game. The Ravens game, everything sort of fell into place. Great matchup. Injuries across the board for Baltimore. Very emotional day. They have, celebrating Jim Donovan, their longtime play-by-play guy. So Winston stepped up, looked great. Can he do it again? And the schedule down the stretch is brutal. So not necessarily someone I want to trust long-term, but that week 11 game, I'll be starting Jameis Winston.
All right, let's, I guess, talk about running backs. I'm always happy. And listen, I know it's going to sound weird. I'm happy when the running back waiver wire list is garbage. That means our starting running backs are healthy, okay? Because that's really when you get these opportunities. But I see your list. The guy that I want is Tajay Spears, but I don't really have that strong of a case for it. I just feel like he's the best handcuff and who also could get 10 carries a game or so. But you take us through this list, Jamie, here, and it's just not the running back week on the waiver wire.
There's nobody really that you're going to pick up and start, unless we get a surprise injury during the week. Spears is someone that before his injury had gotten you his last 2 healthy games, 10-plus PPR points. So as a flex, he might come into play. And then if you buy into, maybe a Braylon Allen touchdown against the Texans, he scored last week, for example, against the Patriots. That's going to be the type of thing you look for. Roshan Johnson's got 4 rushing touchdowns in his last 4 games, so you're counting on maybe somebody like that falling in the end zone. Really what we're looking at here is long-term. And the reason Isaac Guerrero is at the top is because McCaffrey's no guarantee to come back in week 10. We hope that's the case. They're on a bye in week 9. And so if he does not make his return in week 10, and Jordan Mason still has a shoulder injury going into week 10, you just saw Isaac Guerrero have 95 rushing yards, have 3 catches against the Cowboys. It's a tough matchup in week 10, but I don't care. If he's the starter for the 49ers, I want that on my fantasy team, so I will pick him up. I will carry him through the next 2 weeks just to see what happens. The only thing I will say is don't spend a lot of fab on these guys because you're waiting for the injury to happen for them to become lottery tickets. The reason why you see Blake Corum and Kamani Vidal and Allen and some of these guys on this list is because if they get the opportunity to start, they're most likely going to be number 2 running backs. If you have a roster spot to play with, don't go pick up your backup quarterback for a month from now. Pick up one of these running backs because in that month, if they get the opportunity to start, you have a league winner on your hands.
And Dave, you said you love running backs this week. They're the best.
No, I don't remember saying that. I don't think that this is great at all, but I think there are 2 types of running backs to go and pick up, and it's the ones that you're hoping are lottery tickets and the others that, in a pinch, you could use them as a starter and they're lottery tickets. And that's something that Tajay Spears is. That's something that I think Justice Hill is. Justice Hill is still out there in 50% of leagues. I wonder if this week is a decent enough matchup for the Ravens where they lean on Justice Hill. Remember, Hill played about the same amount of snaps as Derrick Henry last week. Do they do it again this week against their matchup? So I think that there's no one that you should prioritize, no one you should spend even 5% of your fab bid on, but guys who could take a roster spot on your bench and you hang on to them for as long as you can. And then when you need that backup quarterback or another wide receiver, somebody else to help you get through the bye weeks later on, you drop them. But there are some names that are interesting out there who either can help you a little bit now and maybe a lot later, or can't help you at all now, but maybe a lot later, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, Dave never said that. It was a joke. He said that right after. He's like, "Oh, I'm not going to watch the end of this Bears game. They're going to win. It's over." Let's talk about wide receivers and tight ends after this break on Fantasy Football Today. It's not just Cedric Tillman. There are some other players you could pick up. And the tight ends, especially if you're in shallow leagues, there are plenty. You could still maybe pick up Cade Otton. All right, so take a look on your waiver wire. We'll be right back on FFT. We are back on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Adam Azer, Dave Richard, and Jamie Eisenberg. We're looking at waiver wire wide receivers and tight ends. Are you ready for a brand new game that I came up with during the commercial break?
Is it hide and seek where you hide and we don't care?
No, but we can play that. Go ahead. I'm hiding. No, it's called Somewhat Rapid Fire Fantasy Football Questions, and it's pretty basic.
Catchy
Here we
title.
go. Yeah. Would you drop Romeo Doubs for Cedric Tillman?
No.
No.
Would you drop Rome Odunze for Elijah Moore?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. 6 targets for Odunze. Not like kind of underrated game.
I think more at double that.
Yeah, sure.
The only
That's a
thing
good point.
that I would say is you still got the bye week for the Browns next week. So
Yeah, but if I'm dealing with these types of wide receivers, I'm taking it week to week anyway.
correct, but I'd probably lean more toward the upside of Odunze and hope that he becomes something.
Would you drop Wan'Dale Robinson for Cedric Tillman or Elijah Moore?
Yes.
Tillman, yes. Moore, no.
Yes to both.
Would you add Josh Downs or Jacoby Myers if they were both available?
Yes.
Myers. Jamie said
Would
yes.
you? Yes. Will Demario Douglas and Drake May ever play a healthy game together?
They did once, and it was great. 21 PPR points. So hopefully we get that moving forward.
Maybe like 2025, something like that. It'll happen. It'll be great. We'll have a party.
Sleeper. Yeah. Will TJ Hawkinson be a top 12 tight end rest of season?
No.
I don't think so. As crazy as it sounds, the tight end position has become really, really good, Adam.
And that's why, I feel like a few hours ago, I was chastised a little bit for suggesting we might be dropping TJ Hawkinson coming off our IR.
Well, but there's a difference between calling a guy top 12 and then saying that he's an easy drop. You hate the premise of carrying somebody all year, and then right when he's back, right when he's ready to make his debut, you cut him. Now, you could do it if you need a roster spot and you've got a great tight end. You don't want to use TJ Hawkinson. Maybe you've got David Njoku. Maybe you've got Cade Otton. In that type of situation, if your worst bench player is TJ Hawkinson and you can't really trade him, then you got to let him go. And I get that, but it just stinks that you would do that.
I haven't carried him all year, and I carried him in an IR spot.
It's a big difference. Yep, 100%.
Emotional attachment to Hawkinson. I get it if you carried him all year. All right, let me get to the. No, you're right. If you carried him all year in a bench spot, wide receivers to
Adam,
add.
if you carried him all year, you'd be in great shape.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be hunched over playing hide and seek. Wide receivers to add: Cedric Tillman and Elijah Moore are. Well, I know you like to group the teammates together. Is Elijah Moore actually number 2 on your list, Jamie?
No, I would take Leggett over Elijah Moore just with the potential of Deontay Johnson getting traded. Moore would probably be 3rd ahead of Coker, who's a little bit lower. Parker Washington's in a good spot, especially if Brian Thomas Jr. misses time, but Christian Kirk's out for the season with the collarbone injury. And then you get to some of these guys. I reordered it a little bit for the column, so Demario Douglas would be after Parker Washington, just with the hope of May and Douglas playing together the last 2 weeks. You had Douglas get sick during the game in London, and then May get concussed against the Jets. But Tolbert, look, he's been frustrated in the last 2 weeks. Quinn Johnston has been banged up and hasn't really done much since week 2, but I like the fact that Justin Herbert's attempting 35-plus attempts on average the last 3 weeks, so hopefully he gets back into the top 2 wide receiver rotation. I don't think if they're using all 3 guys consistently that he's going to significantly distance himself from Palmer, because McConkey really looks like the legit number 1 guy there. So some of those guys, it's kind of similar to what Dave was talking about, the running backs. A little bit of, sort of like discovery to see if a guy like Elijah Moore can keep it up, or somebody like Parker Washington can step up and play well with some of the absences. And then you have at least something that you've seen out of Jalen Tolbert and out of Demario Douglas. And if you need those guys, I would probably start them over, some of these other guys that are just getting an opportunity this week.
Dave, what is your level of urgency to pick up Cedric Tillman?
Low. The only thing I can think of is if I was carrying 0 bench wide receivers and now I've got Pickens and or Deebo Samuel on bye, and now I'm in a real hurry to find somebody who could start for me and maybe get me 15 PPR points. And we've seen Cedric Tillman get huge opportunities over the last 2 weeks. Same thing with Elijah Moore. Their whole lives have changed with Jameis Winston under center. The Browns' fortunes have changed with Jameis Winston under center. And I don't want to overrate them and say that they're going to be like league winners or any kind of cool label like that. But I think they're serviceable starters for fantasy managers who are in a pinch at wide receiver. But if I've got a team that's loaded at wide receiver, what do I need these guys for? I don't. And so there is no urgency in that case.
Yeah, I might disagree slightly. First off, it's not just Jameis, it's also Amari Cooper being traded. That's what's opened up the targets for these guys. But I'll give you just an example. I had a team that was loaded at wide receiver with I just lost Chris Godwin, but Brian Thomas, Stephon Diggs, Garrett Wilson, and I picked up Tillman. No, this was prior to last week. Picked up Tillman prior to last week. And thank God I did, because now I have at least somebody that's a semblance of hope to replace one of those guys, if not two of those guys that are banged up. So you never know when you're going to get these wide receiver injuries. I know we typically talk about running backs being more fragile and volatile than wide receivers. Think about the waiver wire options that we're talking about. We're trying to replace all these receivers over the course of the season. It's probably something to revisit in the offseason, Adam, when you yell at me about all these running backs that are always going to break down and the receivers don't. But in any case, you like to pick up players like this if you have the roster spot. And I'll go back to, again, if you're looking ahead with a bye weeks, it's smart to plan for week 11, week 12, week 13, not week 13, there's no been a bye, but week 14, those type of scenarios. But I would rather pick up someone who's hot right now with the chance of, does it stay this way, or does it maybe continue in a week or two, in the case of Tillman, because they're in a bye in week 10. And if he comes off another strong game this week, we're talking about a potential must-start receiver no matter the matchup, because Jameis will give this guy opportunities and targets and chances to make plays. It's why we like him as a fantasy quarterback, but it's also why we like him as a real-life quarterback, because those interceptions hurt himself and his team, but they help us because he's giving his wide receivers chances.
And I just want to throw one more name out there. You could just play the tape from last week, but I still think Rashad Bateman is pretty interesting at 50% rostered. He dropped a deep ball. If he caught that pass, he probably over 60 yards last week. I know he's not going to get a ton of targets, but again, I look at Jamison Williams, who's rostered in over 80% of leagues, and he's suspended for another game. Rashad Bateman is, I think, a better version of Jamison Williams. So, still a guy who's 5th in yards per target, 4th in yards per catch, and he's about 50% rostered, I think.
I do think you can maybe get him in 2 weeks, because I don't expect much production from someone like him against the Broncos.
Right.
I do. That's the thing. He's not going to get shadowed. No. I don't expect big production, but I don't think the Broncos are necessarily a problem for him, because he does it all on one big play, and he's not going to get shadowed by Patrick Surtain. He's a dart throw every week. But okay, tight ends. You missed your chance on Cade Otton, but he's actually available in about 25% of leagues. So if you do see Cade Otton, bam, get him. Jamie, you like Mike Gesicki. Dave, you like Hunter Henry. It's not the best week for these guys, but hopefully you're for this group, less than 66% roster, 65%. But hopefully you got your tight end. But Jamie, make the case for Gesicki. Dave, follow up with the case for Hunter Henry.
If everything holds for these guys right now, where Drake May does not play and T. Higgins does not play, Mike Gesicki's in a better spot for 1 week than any of these tight ends, because he's played 2 games now without T. Higgins. He's got at least 8 targets in both of those. He's got over 70 yards receiving in both of those, and he's playing the Raiders. I mean, it's a great setup for Gesicki to be the number 2 option for Joe Burrow. Long term, I would much rather have Hunter Henry. If you tell me Drake May is playing and T. Higgins is playing, it's no brainer. But if you just tell me right now T. Higgins is out, even Drake May plays, I'll take Mike Gesicki for 1 week over Hunter Henry. But just the 1 week, hopefully Higgins is back. But I do think Hunter Henry's long-term appeal is better.
I mean, we've seen it with Henry now, 9.5 PPR points in each or more in each of his last 3 games. I think he definitely has a good connection with Drake May. I don't expect Hunter Henry to be a great fantasy tight end in week number 9, because I don't expect Drake May to play. But rest of season, of course, you'd rather have the tight end who is going to play, should be in the neighborhood of about 5 catches a game, over somebody like Gesicki, who kind of disappears when the top 2 receivers in Cincinnati are healthy.
Okay, fair enough. I think it's a 1 week versus rest of season thing. Dalton Schultz plays on Thursday. No Nico Collins. Haven't heard anything yet on Diggs, but that seems unlikely for sure. Mm-hmm. All right, and that's it for tight end, but hopefully you can snag someone. And we're not dropping Hawkinson for any of these guys, right?
I would not.
No, but if I'm stuck and I need to win this week, I'd rather start Gesicki over Hawkinson if T. Higgins is out.
Okay. All right, that's it for the waiver wire. When we come back, who has more? You've waited patiently. You will get it. And then we'll read your tweets at the end of the show. We'll be right back on FFT. Welcome back, everybody. It is time for America's 21st favorite fantasy football game show, up 2 spots from last week, and from what I hear, climbing in the international charts as well. It is, of course, time for Who Has More on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Here's how the game works. I ask a question, Dave and Jamie answer it. Okay, who has more? Who has more rushing yards, Tank Dell or Dak Prescott?
Okay, this is something that's going to help fantasy managers. I don't know if Dak's run at all. Maybe a little bit. I'll say Tank Dell.
I'll say Dak.
It is Tank Dell, 30-24. Both of these guys, this is going to help fantasy.
That's way more yards than I thought.
Both of them run more. This I talked about on Beyond the Box Score yesterday. Dak Prescott is averaging about 4 rushing yards per game. Not even. That is way down. It is one of the reasons why he has struggled as a fantasy quarterback, and it's a problem.
Dave, in that Superflex league where you're deciding between Dak and Tank Dell, now you know the difference.
Yeah.
One will run a little bit more. Just a little bit more.
It's 0.4 points or something like that. Could win me a week. You never know.
Don't you ruin Who Has More for everyone. Who has more?
Don't ask a question that's not going to help anybody.
Oh, it was about Dak Prescott and his lack of rushing. Who has more PPR points in their last 3 games?
Okay.
It's points per game, but it's the same thing. PPR points per game.
The average over their last 3 games. Got it.
A.J. Brown or Kate Otten?
A.J. Brown.
I'll say Otten.
Ooh, Jamie on the board. We're tied at 1. It is by 0.1 fantasy point. A.J. Brown.
See,
19.
I could have used those Dak Prescott rushing yards to beat Jamie on that question.
Yep.
It's off by 0.1.
Who has more, like, times 2? That's like the next level.
But it
Who
really,
has more?
to me, that highlights just how big time Cade Otton has become. And if you saw the game, I mean, you could look at the box score and you would know this, but if you watched how much Baker Mayfield was relying on Cade Otton, mostly on short routes, but a couple of downfield routes too. I mean, he almost looked like he was the Brock Bowers of that offense. And I think it's obviously going to continue, at least until Mike Evans is right.
All right, who has more yards per route run? Josh Downs with Joe Flacco or Jamar Chase?
Josh Downs.
I'll say Chase.
And Jamie takes a 2-1 lead. Josh Downs is averaging more yards per route run with Joe Flacco than Jamar Chase is for the season. 2.37 to 2.36. It was basically tied, but just wanted to highlight how good Josh Downs has been with Flacco. Incredible.
You know, he wasn't bad last week either, although he had a big assist on that long touchdown from the Texans defense. 2 defenders ran into each other at midfield, and that sprung Downs wide open, and Richardson located him and found him, and it was a great play, and he had almost another touchdown in that game. So he was able to do some good things with Richardson, but if Flacco starts in week 9, yeah, it could be big for not only Downs, but also Michael Pittman.
Yeah, Downs is available in one of my leagues. I've already put in a claim for him. He's my number 1 waiver wire priority.
He should be. Good.
And you know what? It might backfire because I still won't trust him if it's Richardson, but I will trust him if it's Flacco. All right, who has more ADOT, air yards per target, basically? Rashad Bateman or Calvin Ridley?
They both are going to have a lot. I'm going to say Ridley.
We are tied at 2. Dave back in the game.
Is it by 1/1000th of a yard, of an air yard?
No, it's by almost a full yard, 15.7 to 14.8. But I think, as you pointed out on Sunday night, Dave,
yes,
Calvin season low ADOT, 11.1 yards, by far his best game in week 8. I like seeing that. We need more of that.
Well, what I liked seeing was double-digit targets, and I think it was 15 targets, something like that for Calvin Ridley. It was awesome. I know that there's some talk that Will Levis might be back under center for the Titans. I don't want that. If I've got Calvin Ridley, I want Mason Rudolph to stay under center, and I want Mason Rudolph to feed him as if he's throwing to Justin Jefferson so that Ridley can keep putting up some really nice numbers. We were writing him off a few weeks ago. I'm glad the role has changed, and I'm glad the opportunity has changed. Now Calvin Ridley can end up being a startable fantasy receiver again.
All right, who has more completions of 30 or more air yards? No, sorry. 30 or more yards. Completions of 30 or more yards.
Okay, so just to be clear, this will include plays where like a quarterback throws a screen and the receiver runs 70 yards for a touchdown.
Correct.
Okay, fine.
Aaron Rodgers or Daniel Jones?
I think it's Jones.
Daniel Jones.
It is Daniel Jones. Congratulations to both of you. The Jets have no big plays in their arsenal. Who has more carries of 0 or negative yards?
Oof.
Breece Hall or Josh Jacobs?
I think they both have a bunch.
I'll say Jacobs.
I was going to say Breece Hall, so Hall.
Dave takes the lead 3-2. Not only does Breece Hall have more than Josh Jacobs, he has more than any other running back in football. He has 5 more carries of 0 or negative yards.
Man. They should bench him for Braylon Allen.
And this is the second year in a row where he's been one of the worst in the NFL in percentage of carries for 0 or negative yards.
So 2 things. Number one, I thought the offensive line was going to be a strength for the Jets this year. I know they've had some injuries, but it's not. And number 2, I think the offense is just a little too old school, and they're not doing enough to kind of keep up with like what the rest of the league is doing. They need to change it up, and they need to freshen it up. And I don't know if that's going to happen because it's not what Aaron Rodgers is used to. And that makes me a little bit nervous about them being a breakout offense. I think they can still be good. And Rodgers said it in his press conference after the game. He just shrugged and said, we need to score 30 points every week. I don't know if he's going to do that very often, but at least it's in his head that he's got to score a ton of points. Maybe that means that he at least stays aggressive in this iteration of the Jets offense.
All right, who has more or a higher percentage of his team's carries inside the 5-yard line? Bijan Robinson or Bucky Irving?
I'll go Bucky.
I'll say Bijan.
You sure, Dave?
Yeah.
Okay, I was trying to help you. Jamie gets it. It's Bucky Irving. 73. Bucky Irving has 73% of his team's carries inside the 5-yard line.
That's great.
He has 8 total. 2 of those came in the game that Rachaad White did not play. I don't know the circumstances. It might just be fluky, but that's pretty crazy. Bucky Irving he's basically, by that stat, the goal line back. I don't know if I would call him that, but by that measure, he is. I don't know.
Look, he's doing a nice job. He's doing a nice job.
He's doing a nice job. If you give me a second, I'll tell you how many snaps inside the 10 he had last week. 1. Rachaad White had 4 out of 5.
In the 10, inside the 10.
Yeah.
All right. So we are tied at 3. 3-3-1 so far. That's our record. With our last who has more of the day. This is why we're climbing the charts. Who has more number 1 songs on the Billboard Hot 100? Taylor Swift or Mariah Carey? Obviously, this is not current. In their careers.
Oh, see, I was prepared for current. I'm not prepared for career.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, now I'm thrown for a loop.
Taylor Swift or Mariah Carey? Who's got more number 1 hits?
I'll say the opposite of whatever Jamie says.
Taylor Carey.
Ooh, it is Mariah Swift. No, come on, give me an answer, Jamie.
I'll say Mariah Carey.
I think he might be right. I'll say Taylor Swift, but I think Jamie might be right.
Terrible guess, David. Is Mariah Carey. Obviously, she's crushing Taylor Swift. She has 19 number 1s. Taylor Swift, with only a measly 12 number 1 hits.
It is interesting, though, that you were watching an old YouTube concert of Mariah Carey instead of your team in the World Series or your team playing on Monday Night Football or your team playing basketball last night. You're very dedicated to Mariah Carey. That's very good. Good job by you.
Yes, the Yankees winning the World Series would be a sweet, sweet fantasy, baby, at this point. How about that?
So
Let's go out on this segment. Quote. All right, that's it for Who Has More. When we come back, your ad drop questions, your waiver wire questions, up next on Fantasy Football Today. We're back for one final segment here on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas, and we are answering your questions on X. This is from Bill. Dear Eric, Jack, and Ginger. Anybody got that one?
Not a clue.
No.
It's the band Cream. I had to look it up. Also, I forgot to say dear. Oh, Jack and Ginger. That's what I meant. Superflex League. I have Jackson and Winston. I feel like I can drop Fields and or Dalton. Which one has a better chance to contribute somewhere down the road?
I think you got to drop Fields at this point.
It's Fields, unless it's a dynasty Superflex league, in which case it's Dalton.
You drop Fields first, right? Yeah.
Yes, in a redraft. Yes.
League, yeah.
Okay.
Russ is playing so well. We really didn't talk about that from the Thursday game, but he played great.
Monday game.
Sunday, Thursday, whatever.
Who's the second best Browns wide receiver pickup on the waiver wire?
You got to go Elijah Moore. You know, it's two strong games from a target perspective without Amari Cooper. Very strong game overall against Baltimore. Again, I don't know who you're dropping to pick up Elijah Moore, who's 4% roster. Like, he might be somebody I let go through waivers once and then try and pick him up later in the week.
Okay. Dave, you agree?
Yeah.
All right, next one. How'd this bozo get on the show, huh? Am I right?
You better hope it's the right guy.
It is. It's my guy, Darce. He beat me senseless in one of our leagues yesterday. And he talked some smack on the message board. Good for you. I have C.J. Stroud looking to make a change with Matthew Stafford, Bo Nix, and Jameis Winston on the waiver wire.
I'd be okay with benching Stroud. If you have to cut Stroud to get Stafford, I think I'd do it, but I wouldn't love it. Stafford would definitely be ahead of Stroud for me rest of season. I don't know if I'm there yet with Nix. But if you can carry two quarterbacks, Stafford would be my first choice. Bo Nix would be second.
Agreed.
All right, I got a few more here. From Caleb, would you drop Devin Singletary?
Well,
I think it just depends on what you need, because Singletary's probably going to start in Week 9 against the Commanders.
That's a good matchup.
At least earlier this season, when he was getting the work he was producing until he had the groin injury, and then Tracy took over. So you're running a little bit of a risk if Tracy does clear the concussion protocol and plays this week. But if you can hold on to Singletary for one more week, I would do it.
Like when we went through all the running backs on the waiver wire part of this show, if Singletary were out there with them, he would be number one on the list, because we think he's going to play because Tracy's going to be out.
Yeah, but people are asking about Tracy, and he is just running away with that job. But not going to be this week, unlikely. Ted wants to know if he can drop Jordan Mason.
I would prefer not to, but clearly if that's your last guy to make a move, because not going to use him next week, or this week, with the 49ers on a bye. But imagine a scenario where his shoulder is fine and McCaffrey can't go Week 10 because his Achilles is still a problem and it lingers for the rest of the season. Like, you'd be really upset if you dropped Jordan Mason. So just make sure that you're not making a lateral move or something that's going to hurt your team.
Man, Jordan Mason has been so bad. Like, not necessarily his fault because he keeps leaving with injuries, but it's something like 5 of the last 6 games, single-digit fantasy points.
Yeah, it's yet another Kyle Shanahan running back that succumbed to injury. He had a great start, and then as soon as he started to break down, things went south quick.
All right, Jason wants to know if he should drop Rico Dowdle for Braylon Allen, Breece Hall manager.
You know, there might be a time in the near future where you'll do that just to lock up the Jets' backfield. Like, that's, an amazing thing. It's amazing because of Breece Hall. I don't know if it's amazing because of Braylon Allen. But Rico Dowdle figures to be the lead running back for Dallas, and I'm not ready to drop him for a handcuff at this point. Once you narrow the field a little bit in your fantasy league and you get to the fantasy playoffs, you'll want to try and optimize your bench a little bit. That's when you'll safeguard things. You'll get Braylon Allen then. I wouldn't do it now.
Cowboys got a good look at what the Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook duo looks like, and it was not good.
It was like looking into an old folks' home.
No, but I'll tell you what scares me, because I do like Rico Dowdle. I have him in a few leagues, but I think that Ezekiel Elliott could be the goal line guy. That's what worries me, because remember last time Rico Dowdle was at the goal line? He fumbled. Zeke, I feel like if he can do one thing, it's score from 2 yards out. Anyway, thank you, Dave and Jamie. I would ask you what your favorite part of the show was, but I think we know it's America's 20th favorite something fantasy football game show, whatever it is. Anyway, thanks for watching Fantasy Football Today. Back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern with another edition here on CBS Sports Network. If you need, check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. And we have so many articles on CBSSports.com. Jamie's got his waiver wire article. Dave's got his trade chart. Great stuff for you there. So again, 1 p.m. tomorrow. That's Wednesday afternoon on CBS Sports Network. For Dave Richard and Jamie Eisenberg, I am Adam Azer. Have a great day, everybody.